The air in Grandfather Theodore's study hung thick with the scent of aged leather and pipe tobacco, a familiar comfort that now felt like a cruel mockery. Dust motes danced in the weak afternoon sunlight filtering through the grimy windows, illuminating the room's neglect. It was a space frozen in time, a testament to a life lived and lost, and now stolen. My sister, Vivian, stood before me, a picture of calculated indifference. Her designer handbag, undoubtedly purchased with ill-gotten gains, swung carelessly from her shoulder. Her lips, painted a defiant crimson, curled into a smirk. "I sold it, Ethan," she announced, her voice as sharp and cold as a winter wind. "Grandfather's house. It's gone." The words struck me like physical blows. My legs felt weak, and I gripped the edge of Grandfather Theodore's massive oak desk, the one he'd built with his own hands, for support. Sold it? But, we agreed. We were going to decide together what to do. Vivian let out a theatrical sigh, the kind she reserved for moments when she wanted to emphasize my supposed inferiority. "Oh, Ethan, must you be so dense?" "We didn't agree on anything. You assumed we would collaborate." Grandfather Theodore, in his infinite wisdom, named me executor. And I, in my infinite wisdom, decided to sell. My grandfather, Theodore Alcott, had passed away 6 months prior. He had been the anchor of our family, a man of quiet strength and unwavering principles. His house, nestled on a sprawling acre of land just outside the bustling city of Oakhaven, was more than just a building. It was a repository of memories, a sanctuary. It was where we'd spent countless summers, learning to fish in the nearby creek, building precarious treehouses, and listening to Grandfather Theodore's captivating stories of his youth. It was where I'd retreated after my own life had crumbled, after my business had failed, leaving me adrift and heartbroken. "You had no right," I managed, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and fury. "That house, it was everything to him. To us." Vivian rolled her eyes, a gesture that always ignited a simmering rage within me. "It was an outdated relic, Ethan. A money pit. I needed the funds. It's as simple as that." "Needed the funds?" I repeated, incredulous. "For what? Another designer wardrobe? Another extravagant vacation you'll flaunt on social media?" Her smile widened, a predatory glint in her eyes. "Perhaps. But you needn't concern yourself with the details. Because, and let me be perfectly clear," she leaned closer, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper, "you won't see a single penny of that money, Ethan. Not 1 cent." I stared at her, the woman I'd grown up with, the woman who shared my blood, and felt a chilling wave of revulsion. This wasn't just about the house, it was about the systematic dismantling of our family's legacy, a deliberate act of cruelty driven by greed and a deep-seated need to assert dominance. I turned and walked out, the sound of Vivian's mocking laughter echoing in my ears. I couldn't bear to be in that house, in her presence, a moment longer. The following weeks were a blur of numb disbelief and simmering resentment. I tried to focus on rebuilding my life, on finding a new path. But the loss of Grandfather Theodore's house cast a long, dark shadow over everything. It felt like a gaping wound, a constant reminder of Vivian's betrayal. I avoided her calls, ignored her texts. Not that she seemed to care. Her social media feed was a constant stream of ostentatious displays of wealth, lavish dinners, new clothes, a weekend getaway to a luxurious resort. Each post felt like a deliberate taunt, a twisting of the knife. Then, one rainy evening, my phone rang. An unfamiliar number. I hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Hello, is this Ethan Alcott?" a man's voice asked. "Yes, it is." "Who's calling?" "My name is Daniel Blackwood. I recently purchased your grandfather's house." My heart sank, hearing those words, spoken by a stranger. made the loss feel even more real, more permanent. "Oh," I managed, my voice tight. "Listen," Daniel continued, "I know this is probably awkward. But I found something in the attic. Something I think you should see." My brow furrowed. "What is it?" There was a pause, a moment of heavy silence. Then, Daniel said, It's complicated. I think it would be best if you came over. It might change things." A shiver ran down my spine. Change things? What could possibly change the fact that Vivian had stolen our inheritance, that our family home was gone? Despite my misgivings, a flicker of hope, however faint, ignited within me. I agreed to meet him the next morning. The drive to Oakhaven felt surreal. The familiar landmarks, the winding roads, the old oak tree at the entrance to the town, all seemed to mock me. Reminders of a past that was now irrevocably altered. As I pulled up to Grandfather Theodore's house, I felt a pang of sadness. The once vibrant garden was overgrown, the paint on the porch was peeling, and the windows were dark and lifeless. It no longer felt like home. Daniel Blackwood, a man in his late 30s with kind eyes and a weary expression, greeted me at the door. He was holding a worn leather briefcase. "Thank you for coming, Ethan," he said, his voice somber. "I wasn't sure if I should call, but after I found this, I felt I had no choice." He led me inside, the familiar scent of the house hitting me like a wave of nostalgia. We walked through the living room, past the empty fireplace where Grandfather Theodore used to tell his stories, and up the creaking staircase to the attic. The attic was a dimly lit space, filled with dusty furniture, cobwebs, and forgotten boxes. Daniel led me to a corner, where a large, antique wooden chest sat half-hidden beneath a pile of old blankets. "It was in here," he said, gesturing to the chest, tucked away in the back. He opened the chest, revealing a collection of old photographs, letters, and documents. He reached inside and pulled out a thick, sealed envelope. It was addressed to me, in Grandfather Theodore's unmistakable handwriting. "This is it," Daniel said, handing me the envelope. "I haven't opened it. I figured it was yours." My hands trembled as I took the envelope. I recognized the seal. Grandfather Theodore's personal wax seal, depicting a soaring eagle. I carefully broke the seal and opened the envelope. Inside were several pages of neatly written text, along with a formal, legally bound document. It was a will. But not the one Vivian had used to sell the house. This will was dated 2 years after the one she'd presented. And it stated, in clear, unambiguous terms, that Grandfather Theodore's entire estate, including the house and all his assets, were to be left to me. My breath caught in my throat. I reread the document, my mind racing. This couldn't be real. Could it? I don't understand, I stammered, looking at Daniel. He shrugged, a mixture of sympathy and bewilderment on his face. "I don't either. But I have a friend who's a lawyer." I showed it to him. He said it looks legitimate. He said it supersedes any previous wills. The implications of this discovery hit me like a tidal wave. Vivian had known. She had found this will, hidden it, and used the older, revoked will to steal my inheritance. She had deliberately, maliciously, defrauded me. A wave of anger, so intense it made me dizzy, washed over me. This wasn't just about the money, it was about the profound betrayal. The violation of trust, the desecration of Grandfather Theodore's wishes. "She knew," I whispered, my voice hoarse with rage. "Vivian knew about this." Daniel nodded slowly. "If this will is valid, and your sister knew about it, and still sold the house, that's fraud. Serious fraud." I didn't sleep that night. I spent hours poring over the will, taking pictures of it, and sending them to a lawyer friend, Sarah, who had helped me with my business troubles in the past. Sarah called me at dawn, her voice filled with a mixture of shock and outrage. "Ethan, this is huge. If Vivian knew about this will and concealed it, she's in serious legal trouble. This changes everything. Armed with Sarah's confirmation and the overwhelming evidence of Vivian's deceit, I decided to confront her. I called her, my hand shaking with barely suppressed fury. She answered on the third ring, her voice dripping with feigned nonchalance. Ethan? What a surprise. To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure? You knew, I said, my voice low and steady, the calm before the storm. There was a brief silence, a flicker of unease in her tone. Knew what, Ethan? You're not making any sense. Grandfather Theodore's real will. The one he wrote 2 years after the one you used. The one that left everything to me. Another silence, longer this time. Then, a nervous laugh. Ethan, you're being ridiculous. I have no idea what you're talking about. You lied to me, Vivian, I continued, my voice rising in anger. You found the real will, hid it, and sold the house, knowing it wasn't yours to sell. You stole my inheritance. There was a long pause, then a single, defiant word, prove it. I hung up. I didn't need to argue with her. I had the proof. And I was going to use it. I met with Sarah the next day, and we immediately began legal proceedings. We filed a lawsuit against Vivian, seeking to invalidate the sale of the house, recover the stolen funds, and pursue criminal charges for fraud. The moment Vivian was served with the legal papers, she erupted. She called me repeatedly, screaming, threatening, and accusing me of ruining her life. I ignored her calls. The legal process was long and arduous, but Sarah was relentless. She uncovered a trail of evidence that painted a damning picture of Vivian's deceit. She found records of Vivian accessing Grandfather Theodore's safe deposit box shortly after his death, where the original will had likely been stored. She found emails between Vivian and a shady real estate agent, discussing the quick sale of the house and the need to keep the transaction under the radar. But the most damning piece of evidence came from an unexpected source, Daniel Blackwood. He had discovered a hidden compartment in the attic chest, where he found a handwritten note from Grandfather Theodore, expressing his concern that Vivian might try to manipulate his will, and his desire for Ethan to inherit everything. The note was dated just weeks before he wrote the final will. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Vivian's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. She initially denied everything, claiming the will was a forgery, that I was trying to frame her. But as the evidence mounted, her denials became increasingly desperate and unconvincing. The legal battle dragged on for months, consuming my life and draining my resources. But I was determined to see it through, to reclaim what was rightfully mine, and to hold Vivian accountable for her actions. Then, a breakthrough. Sarah discovered that the will Vivian had used to sell the house wasn't just outdated, it was a forgery. Vivian had meticulously copied Grandfather Theodore's signature, forged the witness signatures, and altered the date. She had gone to extraordinary lengths to deceive everyone, to steal my inheritance. This discovery changed everything. The civil case against Vivian now became a criminal investigation. She was facing not only the loss of the stolen money and the house, but also the prospect of serious jail time. The final confrontation took place in Sarah's office. Vivian, pale and gaunt, sat across from me, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resentment. Her lawyer, a slick, high-priced attorney she could no longer afford, sat beside her, looking defeated. Sarah laid out the evidence, the original will, the forged will, the handwritten note, the financial records, the emails, the testimony of Daniel Blackwood. It was a mountain of proof, impossible to refute. Vivian, Sarah said, her voice calm but firm, you have 2 choices. You can return the stolen money, cooperate fully with the investigation, and plead guilty to a reduced charge. Or you can continue to fight, face a lengthy trial, and risk a much harsher sentence. Vivian looked at me, her lips trembling. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the sister I used to know, the one before greed and ambition had consumed her. But it was fleeting. Her eyes hardened, and she spat out, "I'll never admit to anything." "You can't prove anything." Sarah sighed. "Vivian, we have everything. The evidence is overwhelming. You're only making it worse for yourself." Vivian's lawyer leaned in and whispered something to her. She shook her head vehemently. He whispered again, more urgently this time. Finally, after a long, agonizing silence, Vivian slumped in her chair. Her shoulders sagged. Her head dropped, and she began to sob. It wasn't a sob of remorse, but a sob of defeat. Of a cornered animal realizing its escape route had been cut off. "I'll do it," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. "I'll return the money. I'll plead guilty." The house sale was reversed. The money was placed in a holding account until things were settled. I should have been elated. I had won. Vivian had been exposed, defeated, and was facing the consequences of her actions. But a nagging feeling of unease lingered. Something wasn't right. A few weeks after Vivian's confession, Sarah called me with disturbing news. "Ethan, we have a problem," she said, her voice tense. "Vivian has moved a significant portion of the money to an offshore account. She claims she's broke, that she spent all the money. But we know that's not true." My blood ran cold. Vivian had played one last card, a final act of defiance. She had anticipated the legal action and had taken steps to protect her ill-gotten gains. How did she do it? I asked, my voice tight with anger. She used a shell corporation, registered in a tax haven. "It's incredibly difficult to trace the funds," Sarah explained. "She's been planning this for a long time." I felt a surge of fury. Vivian had learned nothing. She was still the same manipulative, greedy person she had always been. "We can't let her get away with this," I said, my voice firm with determination. "We have to find that money. I would get grandfather's house back." I refused to let Vivian win, not this time. I vowed to track down the hidden money. No matter how long it took, no matter the cost. I hired a private investigator, a specialist in tracking offshore assets. It was a long shot. But I was willing to take any risk to expose Vivian's final deception. The investigator, a gruff, no-nonsense man named Jack Reynolds, spent weeks poring over financial records, following leads, and piecing together the puzzle of Vivian's offshore dealings. It was a slow, painstaking process, but gradually, a picture began to emerge. Vivian had used a complex network of shell corporations and nominee accounts to transfer the money, making it incredibly difficult to trace. But Jack was persistent. He followed the money trail through a labyrinth of offshore jurisdictions, uncovering layer upon layer of deception. Then, a break. Jack received an anonymous tip. A lead that could potentially blow the case wide open. The informant, a former associate of Vivian's, claimed to have knowledge of the offshore account and was willing to provide information in exchange for immunity from prosecution. Jack arranged a meeting with the informant, a nervous, fidgety man named Mark Olson. Mark had worked for Vivian's financial advisor, and he had helped her set up the offshore structure. Mark provided Jack with detailed information about the account, including the name of the bank, the account number, and the name of the shell corporation used to conceal Vivian's ownership. It was a breakthrough, a crucial piece of the puzzle. But it was also a risky move. Mark was a potential liability, and there was no guarantee he wouldn't betray us. Armed with Mark's information, I decided to take a gamble. I decided to confront Vivian. To play the role of the defeated, naive brother, hoping to lure her into a trap. I called Vivian, my voice filled with feigned resignation. "Vivian, I just wanted to talk. This whole thing has been so exhausting. I don't want to fight anymore." There was a pause, then a smug laugh. Oh, Ethan, are you finally giving up? Realizing you can't win? I want to understand, I continued, forcing myself to sound pathetic. How did you do it? How did you hide the money so well? She hesitated, then, emboldened by my apparent weakness, she began to brag. She explained, in detail, how she had set up the offshore account. What she didn't know was that I was recording the entire conversation. Every word, every detail, was being captured, providing irrefutable evidence of her guilt. I immediately sent the recording to Jack and Sarah. It was the final piece of the puzzle, the nail in Vivian's coffin. Sarah filed a motion to freeze the offshore account, presenting the recording as evidence of Vivian's continued deception. The court granted the motion, and the funds were frozen, pending further investigation. Vivian was furious. She called me, screaming, threatening, accusing me of betraying her. But this time, her threats were hollow. She had no power left. The authorities launched a full-scale investigation into Vivian's offshore dealings. Mark Olson, facing the prospect of serious jail time, cooperated fully, providing even more damning evidence. Vivian was charged with additional counts of fraud, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. Her lawyer, realizing the futility of her defense, advised her to plead guilty. She refused, clinging to the delusion that she could still somehow escape the consequences of her actions. The trial was swift and decisive. The evidence against Vivian was overwhelming. The jury found her guilty on all counts. The judge, visibly disgusted by Vivian's greed and lack of remorse, sentenced her to a lengthy prison term, far longer than the original sentence she had received. I was in the process of restoring grandfather's house to how it was before. I thought it was over. I thought Vivian had finally been brought to justice, that her reign of terror was finally at an end. But I was wrong. There was one final twist. One last act of betrayal that would seal Vivian's fate. It came from an unexpected source, Amanda, Vivian's closest friend. The one who had helped her set up the offshore account. Amanda, facing mounting legal pressure and the prospect of her own prison sentence, decided to turn on Vivian. She contacted Sarah and offered to provide information in exchange for a plea deal. Amanda revealed that Vivian had a second, even larger offshore account. One that she had kept secret even from her closest confidants. This account contained the bulk of the stolen money. Millions of dollars that Vivian had squirreled away. Amanda provided Sarah with the details of the account, including the bank, the account number, and the name of the shell corporation used to conceal Vivian's ownership. It was a stunning revelation, a final, devastating blow to Vivian's already shattered world. Armed with Amanda's information, Sarah immediately filed a motion to seize the second offshore account. The court granted the motion, and the funds were frozen. Vivian, already serving a lengthy prison sentence, was now facing even more charges. Even more jail time. Her life, her carefully constructed empire of lies, had completely collapsed. The additional money was recovered, and the house was finally, irrevocably, mine. With Vivian's final defeat, I was finally able to focus on rebuilding my life and restoring Grandfather Theodore's house. I spent months working on the house, repairing the damage, restoring the garden, and bringing it back to its former glory. It was a labor of love. A way of honoring Grandfather Theodore's memory and reclaiming my family's legacy. I filled the house with new memories, with laughter, with love. I invited friends and family to visit, to share in the joy of the restored home. And as I sat on the porch one evening, watching the sunset over the rolling hills, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Vivian was gone, her reign of terror was over, and I had finally found justice. The house was mine, the legacy was restored, and I was finally free. The inheritance of lies had been exposed, and the truth had prevailed. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. The house was fully restored, reflecting the love and care Grandfather Theodore had always shown it. It was a testament to his enduring spirit, a spirit Vivian had tried, and failed, to extinguish.